Have you ever heard a voice that shouldn't be there? Those words that cut through the silence of the early morning, echoing where there should be no one? She still talks to me every night, and today she called my name. It's this phrase, spoken with the weight of someone carrying an impossible secret, that opens the door to a world where guilt never goes away, where memory becomes a prison, and the night reveals what the day tries to bury. Imagine being alone in a dark room, the only light coming from the moon streaming through the half-open window. The air is heavy, your heart is racing, and then the sound. A barely audible whisper, coming from somewhere you can't quite place. You don't know if it's real, if you're crazy, or if the guilt has finally found its voice. But it's there, always, every night, like an invisible companion that refuses to leave your mind alone. What would you do if in the darkness you heard a familiar voice, one belonging to someone you loved or destroyed? What would that voice whisper to you? Questions? Forgiveness? Or veiled accusations, burdened by a heavy silence? This presence haunting the protagonist of our story is not just a ghost, but a weight, a punishment that turns every night into torment. Have you ever experienced this? Felt guilt materialize and take shape inside your own home, inside your head? At first, he tried to deny it. The fear was greater than the pain. He thought time and silence would bury it, but no. Because guilt isn't silent. It screams, it whispers, it begs to be heard. And in that empty house, in the darkness that swallows every detail, her voice breaks the silence. Today, she didn't just speak, she screamed. And it was impossible to ignore. That muffled sound, almost imperceptible to anyone, is for him a scream in the soul. It's the awakening of a past that refuses to die. Guilt has become his companion. Not a comforting companion, but one that corrodes, that gives no rest. Every night, at the same time it appears, not to ask for forgiveness, but to remember. To remind him that that mistake, that fall, that loss, will never be forgotten. You might think this is madness, a mind overcome by remorse. But what if it's more than that? What if the voice isn't just a hallucination? What you're about to discover may surprise you, because not every ghost disappears when the sun rises. Sometimes they stay. Sometimes they speak. Stay with me until the end, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about a whisper in the darkness. It's about what happens when guilt crosses the line of the invisible and becomes a real, almost tangible presence. What lurks behind these voices? What is the price of a secret you can't tell? And most importantly, what happens when the person you lost still talks to you every night? It's not just a story of regret. It's a dive into the threshold between sanity and terror, between memory and oblivion, between love and the weight of a devastating mistake. Now as the lights go out and the silence becomes deafening, he knows she's there, speaking, waiting, condemning. In that night, unlike the others, he heard what he never imagined he would hear. But what exactly did she say? And why now? What does this voice want to reveal? You're about to find out. Let's continue, because this story has just begun. He never expected the guilt to be so insistent, so present that it would gain a voice of its own. But when it speaks, it's not just a whisper lost in the wind, it's a truth that can no longer be ignored. And it's in this charged silence that this story comes to life, piercing the shadows to reach you, who are there on the other side, seeking to understand what remains when all seems lost. If you've ever felt, even from afar, the weight of a gnawing secret, or the anguish of a past that insists on returning, you know what it means to have a presence that won't go away. And that's precisely why this story can't end here. It needs to continue, to grow, to delve deeper into every obscure detail, into every fragment of a mind trapped between regret and fear. So, if this voice has ever given you chills, if this shadow has stirred something within you, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next, because this journey is far from over. Each story we share here isn't just about revealing the dark side of guilt, but also about opening doors to what many try to hide. When you subscribe, you're not only ensuring you'll hear the next chapters, but you're helping this message reach those who need to hear it. Keeping alive this conversation that many try to silence. It's an invitation to be part of something bigger. A space where mystery and truth walk hand in hand, where pain finds voice and curiosity transforms into revelation. And believe me, what's to come will challenge everything you've ever thought about regret, forgiveness, and what remains when silence ends. So if you want to understand how far this voice can go, how far guilt can drag those who carry it, this is the moment. Because, like him, many have nowhere to run, and perhaps together, we can uncover what hides behind these words that echo. In the darkness, let's continue. Because the night is not over yet, and the truth is far from being revealed. He hadn't always heard that voice. At first, everything seemed like any ordinary story. Two bodies sharing the same space. A routine that repeated itself between morning coffees, forced laughter, and silences longer than any words could fill. There was love, yes, but it was like thin glass, shining on the outside, but carrying invisible cracks, ready to open at any moment. They lived together, but they were far from truly finding each other. He looked at her and saw the reflection of someone who was no longer quite the same. She smiled, but her eyes carried the weight of a sadness he pretended not to notice, because admitting it would open the door to an abyss he didn't have the courage to face. Have you ever wondered how many times we pass by a truth without wanting to see it? How many times what seems like just an argument, a lack of attention, a distant look, is actually the prelude to a greater collapse? In the silence of the apartment, where the television covered the distance between them, he felt the emptiness growing. Conversations dwindled, plans disappeared, and the promises they once made already sounded like distant echoes of something that never really happened. That routine, which from the outside seemed solid, was made of fragile pieces, ready to shatter. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would hear her sigh, so quiet he almost mistook it for the wind. But it was a sigh that said more than any words could. It was the silence that became a scream, the invisible presence of something no one wanted to face. He knew something inside her was breaking, and deep down, a part of him was shattering, too. But his head refused to look at it, his mind built walls, his emotions buried under layers of denial. Because facing what was crumbling took courage, and he wasn't ready for it yet. Love, which seemed to be the glue of the relationship, became a burden. It was a feeling he could no longer decipher. The fear of loss, mixed with resentment, created a terrain where silence was the only possible communication. There were no more comforting hugs, no more words to ease the growing anguish. Fights began to replace conversations, and each argument left invisible marks, scars that bled in secret. He knew those cracks wouldn't disappear on their own. Something had to give. And when something gives, nothing is the same again. As the days passed, what had once been just tension in the air became a wall between them. The glances that passed through the house no longer held warmth, only distrust and distance. What lay buried there was more than superficial hurts. It was an abyss of unspoken emotions, a hidden truth they both tried to avoid. It was a dangerous game where every misplaced word, every ignored gesture, increased the emotional charge that threatened to explode at any moment. He found himself wondering how small, everyday decisions, seemingly trivial gestures, could unleash such devastating impact. A denied touch, a withdrawn glance, a prolonged silence. All of it fueled a flame he couldn't control. And while he tried to maintain the facade, the truth pulsed beneath the surface, ready to emerge at any moment, ready to change everything. Forever. It was this delicate line between love and despair that they walked, unaware that the end was already looming. The routine they were supposed to share was, in fact, an invisible prison, where each was locked within themselves, isolated, unsure of how to reach the other. The pain was so great it could almost be touched, and the fear of facing it made them choose blindness. Because sometimes it's easier to pretend everything is fine than to face the abyss that looms ahead. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding these small signs, these invisible cracks, is essential to understanding what happened next, to seeing how love can transform into something so dark that not even the darkness of night can hide it. The transformation a relationship undergoes when silence and pain take over isn't just a matter of emotions. It's a journey through the mind, through the decisions that shape destiny, through the truths no one wants to reveal. It's a behind-the-scenes look at a story that has not just one face, but many, each carrying their own guilt, their own fear, their own version of reality. And it's in this complexity that the mystery lies. What makes this story so human and so terrifying at the same time? Because when the routine breaks, when the silence becomes deafening, that's when the hidden truth begins to reveal itself slowly, like a shadow stretching over everything. Before this voice haunting the protagonist could gain strength, he still lived amid these fragments of love and pain, of hope and despair, of truth and lies intertwined in a silent dance. The fragility of that time was the foundation for everything that would come after, for the impact that would transform his life forever. Now, I want to know, what word or phrase defines for you that moment when everything starts to fall apart? Right here in the comments. I want to hear from you, understand how each of us carries our own pain, our own ghosts. Because in the end, it's these memories that connect us, that make us human. And the journey that begins here isn't just his, it's for everyone who's ever felt guilt become companionship. The day everything fell apart began no differently than any other. The routine, heavy and worn, seemed to drag like an invisible weight on his shoulders. That silence that settled in the air was more than an absence of words. It was a vacuum, a frozen space between two bodies that could no longer touch without tension crackling in the air. The hours dragged by slowly, gestures became mechanical, glances cold. Yet what seemed like just another ordinary day held the potential to turn his world upside down, a disaster waiting to explode, latent, waiting for the spark that would ignite everything. They weren't strangers to each other. They knew every flaw, every weak point, every silence that revealed what words couldn't. But that day, the tension that always lurked at the edges of their relationship became impossible to contain. Voices rose, first in complaints, then in shouts that cut through the air like sharp blades. It was no longer just a trivial argument. It was the release of years of accumulated hurt, unspoken pain, fears, and frustrations that transformed the house into a silent battlefield. The loss of control came quickly, almost instinctively. There was no time to think, to consider the consequences. It was an impulse, an act of rage that, at that moment, seemed the only way to put an end to what could no longer be endured. But what he didn't imagine was that that fleeting and violent moment would forever carry the weight of the tragedy. The hand that pushed, the body that fell, the ground that received a silence too heavy to be broken. And then the silence came. The absolute silence that's louder than any scream. The fixed gaze, the air that no longer moves, the breath that doesn't return. It wasn't supposed to kill. But now she's not breathing. Those words, so simple and terrible, are the echo he's carried ever since. A burden that tightens his chest with each tick of the clock. The shock of the accident, the truth that can't be undone, the reality that brutally imposes itself. The moment he realized what had happened, his world crumbled. Denial lasted only a few seconds, because the fixed gaze, the immobile body, left no room for illusions. Guilt was no longer a distant shadow. It was a suffocating, palpable presence, a force crushing him with all its intensity. What he had done could not be undone, and the knowledge of that act transformed every second that followed into silent torture. There were no tears. There were no pleas. Only a heavy silence that filled the space, a void that seemed to grow with each passing moment, swallowing everything around it. The shock wasn't just of death, but of the end of what had once been a promise. A life lost in an instant, dragging with it what remained of hope, of love, of the future. And there, in that exact moment, amidst despair and disbelief, the decision was made. It wasn't just her death that needed to be hidden, it was the truth. The weight of guilt, the reflection of what he had become. Because what remained for him was silence, not just the silence of the empty house, but the silence of the buried secret, of what no one could know. But no matter how much the body could be hidden, no matter how much the secret could be kept, from the eyes of the world, there was something he could not bury. Her voice, the inextinguishable presence, the constant whisper that came with the darkness of the night. Because guilt, that silent companion, knows no rest. It lives, breathes, and speaks, and that is precisely what makes this story so unsettling, so real. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, to understand what happens behind the scenes of a mind torn apart by guilt. How the decisions made in that moment of loss of control reverberate in every thought, in every sleepless night, in every shiver down the spine. This is not just a story of tragedy. It is a journey through the brutal transformation of a life that fell apart, and the hidden truth that cannot be ignored. And along this path, the impact of what was done isn't limited to the act itself. It invades the mind, corrupts perception, and makes living with the past a daily battle. What seemed like an accident becomes a minefield of emotions, regrets, and pain that doesn't heal with time, because time only makes the wound open wider. If you've ever felt, even slightly, the weight of a decision that changed everything, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever carried the pain of a silence that screams, you understand what it means to have a presence that won't go away. I want you to think about this as we move forward, because the story you're about to learn will stir those deep, genuine emotions, those truths that many try to hide. Now, for those of you following this journey with me, I want to know, what word defines the pain you felt, the kind you can't forget, the kind that stays etched in your soul? Leave a comment with the word that best describes this feeling for you. Stay with me until the end, because what follows will delve even deeper into this memory, this pain, this hidden truth that cannot be ignored. He knew he couldn't leave a trace. Every movement in that heavy silence seemed amplified, every breath becoming a suppressed scream. Fear was a solid presence, a shadow that followed him step by step, clinging to his skin. In the middle of the night, under the thick blanket of an unforgiving darkness, he dragged himself to that forgotten place, the forest where ancient trees held secrets deeper than time. There, amid twisted roots and dead leaves, he did what he never imagined he had the courage to do. He dug a deep hole, almost desperately, as if the earth could swallow not only his body, but also the guilt, the fear, the silence that was now his worst companion. His hands trembled, his strength seeming to drain away with each handful of earth that returned to its place. Burying a body was more than a physical act, it was a silent pact with the abyss, a desperate attempt to hide the truth that consumed every thought. He whispered promises that even he didn't believe, vows of silence, silent pleas for it all to disappear. But the cold earth gave no answer, offered no solace. It merely received, motionless, the weight of that secret he believed he could bury with it. Even after the last shovel of dirt covered what remained of her, he realized it wasn't her body holding him captive, but something much heavier. Her voice. Those unspoken words, the phrases that lingered in the air, the memories that refused to be silenced. Guilt materialized in ways he couldn't control, appearing in the small details, in the echoes of the past, in the moments when loneliness crushed him with its silent force. The disappearance of her body didn't mean the weight had lifted. The shadow it carried was larger, denser, crueler. The silence of the night became a courtroom without judges. Every noise seemed like a sentence, every shadow an accusation. He heard imaginary footsteps, felt invisible presences, saw faces that refused to leave. His mind, once a refuge, became a minefield where explosive memories detonated without warning. Guilt wasn't just a shadow that followed him, it was an active voice, a constant presence that invaded his dreams, transforming his waking hours into continual torment. The pact he'd made with the darkness was broken every night by that voice, echoing insistently, making it clear that silence would not be his refuge. It was as if she were there, beside him, with eyes that couldn't see, but felt everything, the fear, the pain, the anguish he tried to suppress. Guilt, which had seemed like an invisible beast, was now a palpable being, a relentless companion that gave him no rest. The earth could have swallowed the body, but it could not swallow the hidden truth growing within him. The impact of that night was not something you could bury beside the body. It was a profound transformation, an irreversible shift in mindset, a journey he had no choice but to undergo. With each day that followed, reality shattered into fragments, revealing a man who no longer recognized himself, trapped behind the scenes in a story of pain and regret. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what appears to be just a buried secret is in fact a chain of revelations that cannot be silenced. Her voice, which he believed he had silenced, is a constant reminder that the past never stays where we want it to, and that the decisions we make can transform our lives in ways we can't even imagine. Understanding this duality between hiding a body and burying guilt is essential to understanding what comes next, to seeing the real impact this weight has on the mind and soul. If you've ever carried a pain you couldn't forget, a memory that insists on returning at the most unexpected moments, you know what it's like to live with the presence of something that won't go away. I want you to think about this, and if you feel that this story touched something deep inside you, share word, a phrase in the comments that represents that feeling, that memory that hurts, that memory that won't go away. It's in this space that we connect, acknowledge our own wounds, and perhaps find some understanding. He lay in the dark, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, dappled by the shadows of the dancing trees outside. The silence in the house was heavy, almost suffocating, but he tried to control his breathing, as if he could hold the air in his chest and thus prevent anything from invading that already charged space. The clock read 3:17 am, the exact same time that so many nights brought him invisible torment. And then, out of nowhere, he heard it. A voice. A barely audible whisper, seemingly coming from within the wall itself, from a place beyond reason. My name. It was as if the air moved in slow waves, carrying those fragile yet definitive syllables. The voice was familiar, achingly close, yet impossible to touch. He tried to close his eyes, thinking it was a product of his tired mind, a delirium, brought on by the guilt that nestled like an open wound. But when he opened them again, the sensation remained, stronger, more real, as if someone were there, listening to every beat of his heart, waiting for an answer he wasn't sure he could give. Doubt gnawed at his mind. Was this just his consciousness, trying to find a way out? Or was something beyond logic and science trying to communicate, breaking the barrier between the world of the living and what was left behind? The feeling that he wasn't alone was more than a thought. It was a presence, an invisible weight that sat beside him, filling the room with a chill that didn't come from the wind. He knew that guilt had already become his companion, a companion that doesn't forgive, that doesn't forget. But that voice, that first voice, broke something inside him, opened a new wound, a fissure that had no healing. It wasn't just a memory, it wasn't a remnant of the past. It was something that insisted on existing, on manifesting itself, on telling him that what was buried outside still breathed within. And that night, for the first time, he realized he could no longer escape this dark dialogue. The room seemed smaller, the shadows denser. The sound of that whispering voice carried an urgency that couldn't be ignored. A message he didn't yet understand but knew was crucial. It wasn't just regret. There was something more there, a hidden truth pulsing between the unspoken words. A mystery that cast unanswered questions in the stillness of the dawn. It was as if each whisper carried a weight, a revelation that would slowly unfold, like a piece of a puzzle he had yet to put together. His mind, overcome with exhaustion, wavered between reason and madness, trying to explain the inexplicable. Try as he might, he couldn't shake the idea that the voice was real, that someone or something was trying to reach him through the veil between worlds. Each passing moment seemed to heighten the tension, deepen the mystery, make him question everything he believed. And amidst this turmoil, the guilt that had once been a silent weight now spoke, crying out for attention and perhaps for redemption. Deep down, he knew that first night wouldn't be his last, that the whisper had broken the barrier, that it had opened a door to something that could no longer be closed. The line between memory and presence was beginning to blur, and a cruel doubt crept in. Was it possible to live with it without losing one's mind? Was it the voice of conscience or something far more sinister? What if it were true that some voices never die, but linger, waiting for an answer no one has the courage to give? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because that first night is just the beginning of a journey through the torn mind of someone facing the impossible. The transformation that begins there is not just mental. It is spiritual, emotional, a descent into the shadows of guilt that becomes companionship. A series of decisions that shape the fragmented reality between life and death, reason and madness, truth and mystery. Every sigh, every whisper, every heavy silence reveals an impact that goes far beyond the physical. It's a journey through hidden details, through revelations the mind tries to hide, but the heart cannot ignore. Understanding this complexity is essential to understanding how nights become long, how loneliness intensifies, and how fear of the unknown transforms what seemed impossible into something palpable, almost tangible. If you've ever felt that strange sensation that something is there, even when everything seems empty, or if you've ever had an inexplicable chill in the middle of the night, I want you to write in the comments below the word that best describes that feeling for you. It could be fear, doubt, silence, guilt, any word that carries the emotional memory of that encounter with the inexplicable. Your experience could be the key to understanding together this darkness that touches us all, in one way or another, and it is here, at this tenuous point between reason and fear, that the story unfolds, revealing layers that cannot be contained in a single night, nor in simple words. If you've felt the chill, the uneasiness of something inexplicable, you know this journey cannot end here. What you're about to discover goes beyond what meets the eye. It's a deep dive into secrets that insist on remaining hidden, into voices that won't be silenced even when they should be. So, if this narrative has ever stirred something within you, if this invisible presence provokes questions you can't help but ask, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next installments of this far from finished story. It's more than just watching a video, it's being part of a community that seeks to understand what lurks in the shadows, that wants to hear those voices so many try to silence. When you subscribe, you help keep this space alive, where difficult truths have their place, where mystery transforms into knowledge and reflection. And above all, it ensures that you'll be the first to hear what comes next, because the truth often lies in details that only appear when we look closely. When we don't look away. It's not just a promise, it's an invitation to continue uncovering what few have the courage to tell, to stay inside the stories that remain hidden in silence, in the long nights, in the voices that still speak. And this story we're beginning now is only just beginning. The next step will reveal what really happens when guilt becomes a companion we can't abandon. So, If you want to understand how far this voice can go, what it really means, and what happens when silence becomes impossible, stay with me. Because what follows will make you look at the night differently. And this is just the first part. He doesn't know exactly when it started, but he knows she always speaks at the same time, 3:17 a.m., exactly. Like a clock that can't be turned off, an alarm that goes off in the silence of the night and pulls him into a reality he didn't choose, that he doesn't want, but from which he can't escape. Guilt has become his clock, his relentless marker of time, his silent executioner that insists on reminding him, mercilessly, of what cannot be undone. It is at that precise moment, when the world seems to stop and the air grows thick, that her presence manifests itself, shattering the silence with that whispering voice that penetrates walls, burns the air, that touches the deepest core of fear and anguish. The repetition of that scene is a never-ending cycle. Every night, like a curse, he prepares to hear what he wishes he never heard. At first, terror gripped him, his heart pounded, his breath caught in his throat, his eyes scanning the room for some sign, some indication that what he heard was real or just a figment of his tired mind. But the fear, so voracious and acute, the first few times gradually gave way to something much crueler: familiarity. That voice, which once seemed like a frightening ghost, became a constant, inescapable companion, almost a familiar presence that refused to leave. And as if that weren't enough, he began to realize it wasn't just the voice. It was the details that came with it, the scent in the air, the chill that froze his skin even with the blanket pulled tight, the sensation of something invisible touching his shoulder, as if she were there, right there, even though he couldn't see her. It was a routine imposed by guilt, a macabre ritual he could neither choose nor abandon. He didn't choose to be a prisoner of that moment, but he became its slave. And in the silence of the early morning, while the world slept, he relived what he couldn't erase, dialogued with what remained, trapped in a cycle that was a mixture of torment and need. This routine, this insistence of guilt marking the hours with that voice, was the past's way of staying alive. It was as if time had ceased to exist for him, reduced to an endless sequence of nights marked by 3:17, as if guilt itself had set a cruel clock that could never be postponed or ignored. The terror of the first time gave way to a more contained fear, a tension that became part of daily existence, a constant reminder that he could not, and never would, free himself from what he had done. But coexistence doesn't mean relief. Quite the opposite. It's like having a shadow that grows and tightens, that insinuates itself into every thought, that refuses to dissipate even when light tries to enter through the window. Her presence became an unchosen companion, a presence that haunts him, that forces him to face the hidden truth he tried to hide from the world and from himself. Each night was a repeated chapter of the same story, the presence that won't be silenced, the weight that won't lessen, the torment that won't dissipate. This routine of guilt transformed his mind. It changed his perception of time, space, and reality itself. The transformation was subtle and relentless, a transformation of mentality that allowed no rest, that required alertness, preparedness, trapped in a cycle where past and present blend and become indistinct. The impact of this experience shaped his journey definitively, taking him to a place where the line between reality and imagination becomes too thin to distinguish. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding this cycle is understanding the inner workings of a mind living in conflict, the decisions it makes to save itself, and the revelations that emerge when guilt ceases to be just a feeling and becomes a tangible presence. The story it carries isn't just about fear. It's about the weight of a hidden truth that can't be denied, about the lasting effect that one night, one moment, one choice can have on an entire life. And it is this journey that we will unravel, delving into the deepest layers of this invisible torment, revealing the nuances of the mind that has become a prisoner of its own guilt and the impact this has on its sanity, its isolation, and its search for a redemption that may never come. Now I want you to write a word or a phrase in the comments that represents to you the feeling of carrying a guilt that won't go away, a memory that insists on returning in the darkest hours. Stay with me until the end, because what follows will touch on points everyone would rather avoid, but that sometimes need to be faced so that the truth can emerge. He became an island in the middle of a sea he no longer wanted to sail. The world around him was crumbling, not because of the external storm, but because of the lack of a safe harbor. Those who once reached out to him had drifted away, driven away by the weight of silence, by the words never spoken, by the fear that settled like a haunting shadow. His family, once his foundation, became an invisible wall separating him from life, from the past, from what had once meant support and love. Every gesture of indifference, every suspicious look was like a silent stab, cutting away what remained of hope. He knew, silently and cruelly, that he was alone. And in this isolation, his mind began to slip away. Not abruptly or suddenly, but like a thread slowly unraveling, until all that remained was a hazy jumble of thoughts, memories, and fears. His sanity, once so firm, wavered with each passing day, consumed by the lack of understanding, by the loneliness that corroded the soul. He tried to cling to what remained, but it was like trying to hold on to smoke. No matter how hard he tried, it slipped through his fingers, leaving a growing, terrifying void. But there was her. Always her. Not family, not friends, not justice, or the outside world. She, the voice that wouldn't shut up, the ghost that wouldn't hide. She was all that remained, the only link that still held him to a reality he no longer wanted, but which he had to face. She became the invisible and inevitable companion, the punishment he couldn't avoid, the comfort he couldn't abandon. In that moment, guilt took shape and a name, and it was she who filled the empty spaces left by the absence of others. She was more than a ghost. She was the reflection of the pain he carried, the symbol of the hidden truth no one else wanted to see. As the world receded, she drew closer, becoming a constant presence, a weight that crushed and sustained at the same time. She spoke without sound, touched without hands, looked without eyes, and he had no escape. It was a vicious cycle, an emotional prison where past and present intermingled in endless torture. The impact of that isolation was not only emotional, but also mental, a transformation that took him to a place where logic bends, where decisions become increasingly difficult, where fear and pain become daily companions. The journey he faced was lonely and painful, a journey through the shadows of his own mind, where the cruelest revelations lurked, waiting to be faced. And there, in that imposed silence, the hidden truth began to reveal itself, slowly and relentlessly. It is in this solitude that internal wounds deepen, that invisible scars become too painful to ignore. Isolation is not just physical. It is a prison of the mind, a jail where the unwanted company of guilt reigns supreme. And the more he tried to escape, the more it lingered, like an inseparable shadow, an indelible mark that no one else saw, but which he felt with every fiber of his body and soul. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding his isolation is understanding the weight of absence, the silence that speaks louder than any words, and how loneliness can transform a mind and a life. Let's explore how this mental transformation influences every thought, every decision, every attempt to grapple with a truth that refuses to be forgotten. Write in the comments a word or phrase that translates to you what it's like to be trapped in a loneliness that hurts, isolates, and scares, that feeling of carrying a pain that no one sees, but burns inside. I want to know how you named this absence, this invisible companion, this emptiness that screams in the silence. He didn't know exactly when he decided to turn his torment into recorded words. Perhaps it was a desperate attempt to exorcise that voice that never left him alone to put into concrete form what he felt so confused and suffocating. The recorder, simple and silent, became his confidant, the only one who didn't judge, who didn't interrupt, who simply listened. In the middle of the night, when the world seemed to collapse into silence, he would press the button and release everything that was boiling inside him, the fear, the guilt, the pain, the regret. It was a solitary outburst, a monologue he hoped no one would ever find. But the unexpected happened. When someone, by chance or out of curiosity, heard that recording, it wasn't just his voice that made itself felt amidst the darkness. In the background, amid the trembling words and anguished sighs, there was another voice. A feminine voice. Faint, almost a whisper, that didn't belong to the present, but seemed to echo from a past too dark and heavy to ignore. That voice wasn't speaking only to him. It wasn't a secret kept hidden within walls. It was a message that transcended time, a disturbing invitation to delve even deeper into the mystery that haunted his mind. The impact of this discovery was immediate and devastating. Those who first heard it were torn between disbelief and fascination, between fear of the inexplicable and the desire to uncover the hidden truth behind that forbidden audio. Questions arose with no clear answers. How did that female voice get there? Was it truly a ghost, a remnant of what was buried? Or was it the product of the torn mind of a man consumed by guilt, capable of creating echoes and ghosts to alleviate his own torment? The controversy raged, generating heated discussions. Some swore the voice was real, a manifestation from beyond that needed to be heard and understood. Others pointed to a rational explanation, audio distortions, or psychological phenomena that would explain the overlapping voices. But the fact is, the recording was out of the ordinary, opening a gap where mystery and pain intertwined in a disturbing way. She spoke, and no longer just to him. She spoke to everyone who dared to listen, to everyone who carried their own shadows and guilt. More than a record of a troubled mind, that audio became a symbol of the internal struggle between truth and silence, between what was done and what needed to be revealed. It was a hidden confession, a contained scream that could no longer be stifled, a presence that defied the limits of reason and human understanding. Every word, every sigh, every fragment of that recording carried the weight of a complex emotional journey where decisions made under the yoke of guilt shaped a fragmented reality, full of twists and turns and secrets that were far from forgotten. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this hidden confession is not just an echo of the past, but an invitation to understand the inner workings of the mind that records its own pain for the world to hear. The mental transformation that leads someone to record their ghosts is a revealing process. It reveals not only human frailty, but also the profound impact that guilt and loneliness have on the perception of truth. Every decision, every thought captured in that audio is a piece of the puzzle that helps us unravel the complexity of a soul, marked by regret and a desperate search for redemption. This audio is a bridge between what was hidden and what needs to come to light, a window into the revelations that change the narrative and make us question everything we thought we knew about that story. It's an invitation to delve into the depths of a journey that doesn't end with silence, but that finds in the voice, even if hidden, a way to continue existing, to continue speaking, to continue disturbing. Now I want to hear from you. What word or phrase best captures the feeling of hearing something that should be hidden, but that bursts forth and can no longer be ignored? Write in the comments and share this emotional memory that stirs the pain, indignation, and identification we all carry at some point. He returned to the place where it had all begun, and perhaps where it all should have ended, that silent wood, bearing the weight of a secret buried in the shadows of the tall trees, seemed darker than the last time he had been there. The ground, marked by the footprints that had once dug into the earth, was now clean, as if it had never been disturbed. The hole he remembered, the place where the guilt had been buried along with the body, was simply gone. A strange emptiness that made no sense. An absence that tore apart the little relief he had felt in that desperate attempt to bury the truth. The silence of the forest seemed to close in around him, denser, heavier. He felt his heart race, an unsettling foreboding invading his already tormented mind. Then his eyes fell on something unexpected, an envelope, carefully placed on a smooth stone, as if it had been left there on purpose, waiting for him. The handwriting was unmistakable, her handwriting, which he thought he would never see again, writing words that shouldn't exist. The envelope was sealed, but with a delicacy that belied the weight of what it contained. There, in the middle of nowhere, a message from beyond, a fragment of what he was trying to forget. He opened the letter with trembling hands, his breath strangled, as if each word could suffocate or liberate, depending on what was revealed. The date at the top was even more disturbing, the day after her death. How could it be? How could someone who was no longer breathing write a letter, leave a message? It was as if time had shattered, as if past and present were intertwined on that paper, defying all logic and sanity. Each written line carried a pain, a revelation, a hidden truth no one expected to find. The letter wasn't just a confession. It was an invitation to look beyond the surface, to question what one believes to be real, to confront the behind the scenes of a story that couldn't fit into a simple narrative. She spoke with a clarity that belied the mystery that enveloped her, revealing details only she could know, describing sensations only a trapped spirit could feel. It was a message for him alone, for the mind and heart that carried guilt and fear, for the soul that found itself sinking in a sea of regret and doubt. He felt the transformation that letter wrought. In his mind, it was no longer possible to escape the hidden truth that fragile sheet of paper brought to light. The journey he had tried to bury with his body now began there, with words that defy silence and invite an even deeper dive into the impact the past has on the present. Decisions made in seconds that shaped an entire life, revelations that accumulate like pieces of a disturbing puzzle, echoes of an outcome that seemed never to arrive. The cold wind whispered through the leaves, carrying an omen, a promise that the story was far from over. That moment, marked by the absence of the body and the presence of the letter, was a turning point. An instant where what seemed closed reopened, where the mystery deepened, where pain and hope mingled in a knot almost impossible to undo. It was a reunion with the very essence of what had been experienced, and the beginning of an inevitable confrontation with what was yet to come. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this letter isn't just a piece of paper with words. It's a portal to the emotions and secrets he tried to hide even from himself. Understanding the impact of this reunion is understanding the transformation of the mind and heart, the way decisions, hidden truths, and revelations emerge from the shadows to change the course of an entire existence. It's a journey behind the scenes of a confession that won't be silenced. A journey where past and present collide in a silent duel, fraught with pain and mystery. I want you to consider the power such a message would have on you, a word written after what seemed like the end, a hidden truth that challenges everything we know. Leave a word or phrase in the comments that conveys this feeling of rediscovering something we thought lost, of facing a pain that returns renewed, of opening yourself to a mystery that refuses to close. It is in this space that we will connect, acknowledging together the weight of memories that cannot be erased, of truths that insist on returning to haunt us. He no longer feels fear when night falls. Not because the horror has disappeared, but because he has learned to live with it, to accept that it is there, waiting. Not a visitor, not an accident, but a constant, silent, and inescapable companion. She is no longer a shadow hiding in the gloom. She is the presence that fills the void, the voice that breaks the silence and the space he can fill with nothing but his own guilt. That dark room, once a scene of torment and chills, has now become a familiar setting, where he waits, resigned, for the next whisper, The next scream that will claw at his soul. She is all that remains, the last thread that binds him to a reality that no longer makes sense. Death took his body, took what was left of what was once life, but guilt remained, that relentless companion that knows no rest, that neither forgives nor forgets. Guilt became a voice, became a living memory, became an echo that refuses to be silenced, a presence that insists on speaking, on pulling at the thread of memories, on provoking the shiver that never fades. He is not alone. He's accompanied, yes, but not by those he would like. He is accompanied by that which he himself nurtured, that grew and took shape, that settled in every thought, in every heartbeat. This eternal companionship has no set time or specific place. It lives in every shadow, in every silence of the early morning, in every moment he allows himself to remember. It is a torment and a punishment, a burden that transforms the mind and heart into constant battlefields. There is no escape, no respite. The transformation that guilt wrought was not merely external, not merely an added weight on his shoulders. It was a profound shift in his mindset, a reconfiguration of his perception of life, death, and self. He is no longer the same man who lived that fateful moment. He is a fragmented reflection, an echo laden with regret and pain. Every decision he made at that moment now echoes like a constant thunderclap within him, reverberating in the shadows of his conscience, challenging his sanity and his desire for redemption. The journey he takes is tortuous, marked by endless revelations, hidden truths that insist on surfacing, and a silent struggle that unfolds far from the eyes of the world. Guilt, that invisible entity, shapes his nights, his memories, and his uncertain future. That voice, once an agonizing scream, a desperate whisper, is now a continuous dialogue. No longer a chase, but a forced conversation, a bitter understanding between what was lost and what can never be recovered. Death took the body, but the guilt remained to speak. And it has no end, no pause, no mercy. It is this transformation, this internal upheaval that blends pain, regret, and an almost tangible presence that reveals the complexity of the human mind in the face of the unbearable. A companion that never says goodbye, that makes the past present, and that, more than anything, teaches that the end doesn't always mean the end. What is lost in the physical remains in the invisible, the immaterial, in the shadows that whisper. When the world is silent, now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the eternal companion of guilt is to unravel the internal mechanisms that prevent the end, that prolong pain and make life a daily battle against an invisible but ever-present enemy. It is through this immersion that we discover how split-second decisions transform entire trajectories, how the hidden truth can be heavier than any sentence, and how the impact of this weight resonates in the darkest corners of the mind and heart. I want you to write in the comments a word or phrase that conveys to you the feeling of carrying an invisible companion, that constant presence that won't go away, that won't let you forget, that speaks to you in the quietest moments. Share this emotional memory that combines pain, indignation, and identification, because understanding this is also understanding a little of our own humanity. If you've made it this far, it means this story touched something inside you, that voice that won't shut up, the guilt that won't go away, the shadow that insists on lingering. If you'd like to leave a comment that expresses what you felt along this journey, something like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me," it will help us understand how these invisible voices also speak to you. It's a way of knowing we're not alone in this maze. And if this connection made sense, if this dive brought more questions than answers, the like is more than a gesture. It's a sign that this search for truth, this fight against silence and injustice, is worth continuing. It's a silent pact between the one who tells and the one who listens, a way of keeping alive this flame that insists on revealing what many try to hide. There's a video right there that speaks directly to what we just saw. It's a natural continuation of this journey, a new layer that will open other doors. It's worth sticking with me, following this thread that's still far from being undone. The next part will show what happens when guilt stops being just a companion and transforms into something even more disturbing. Stay here and let's go together.